I'm delighted to welcome our next guest because I've been reading his work for a long time. Kim Stanley Robinson is widely recognized as one of our leading science fiction writers in this country and I imagine worldwide. He's been doing it for a while now. Sometimes his novels get described as humanist science fiction because they come from, well, a set of values that I certainly enjoy and appreciate. And I'm delighted to welcome him to the program. Stan, thanks for coming on the show.
With you.
So, okay, good. Now, listen, my question for you, you just wrote a piece for Scientific American entitled, What Will It Take for Humans to Colonize the Milky Way? And you point out this has been something that's been in our imagination for a long time. You mentioned the Russian rocket scientist Tsiolkovsky, also the novels of Olaf Stapleton, and so on. Going back a long ways, is it possible? Are we really destined for the stars?
Well, I don't think so. It's an obvious idea because we can see the galaxy and indeed the universe out there, and we like to explore and travel. And so um, there's a kind of immediate logical fallacy, you might say, that because we can see it, we can go there. Very basic, but it seems that the evidence is growing that it could be quite wrong. I mean that the universe is way bigger than we thought when we formulated the idea, and at a certain point, the quantitative difference becomes a qualitative difference. So it's not like going to the moon, and it's not even like going to Mars. So because of my novel Aurora, I've been trying to make this distinction between our solar system and the rest of the galaxy. That our solar system is almost like our neighborhood, and it is indeed accessible to humans and is super interesting as such. But even the closest stars are exponentially further away, and it becomes extremely problematic getting there. And then once you get there, your problems haven't ended.
Right. You
So.
you don't know what you're going to get, or you face, as you point out in your piece, one of a couple different types of challenges: either adapting to an alien biology with all the risks that takes, or transforming a planet that has no biology at all. So, but I guess one of the things that strikes me about this whole topic, and I'm really glad you wrote this piece, Kim Stanley Robinson, is one of the reasons why it strikes me as an important topic. One, psychologically, I think it's human nature to want to escape your immediate vicinity. There is something within us that wants to do that. But I also think in many ways it's politically relevant right now, because if you think in terms of only our solar system as our accessible home, and you've written the Mars trilogy, which talks about terraforming Mars and perhaps populating that planet someday. But nevertheless, we're looking at limited real estate. And I think one of the seductions of interstellar travel as a story we tell ourselves is that I think it may lead us sometimes to the idea, well, we don't need to worry too much about the preservation of this Earth we're on now, because there's going to be another, I forget what they call them on Star Trek, M class. Well, I guess that is what they call them, M class planet or whatever. That there will be other worlds out there as beautiful and as rich as this one, so we really don't have to treat this one well. And I don't know if you think I'm on the right or wrong track, but somehow I think that by recognizing that that may not be possible, it elevates our responsibility, or highlights our responsibility towards this planet.
Yes, well, I agree with you, and that was really part of my motivation for writing Aurora and for these pieces for Scientific American and Boing Boing. Um, I think that in economics they call this the moral hazard, or in political economy or philosophy, the moral hazard that if you think you can do something risky, that you'll be saved at the end of it by some exterior factor, then that's a moral hazard and you don't take full responsibility. So I agree. I think there's this hidden thought, and of course you do get prominent and brilliant people like Stephen Hawking saying, "Oh well, we need to establish a planet B so that humanity's not in danger of going extinct if we mess it up here." And I think that this is simply wrong. That there is no planet B. That we evolved on this planet for these conditions, and I'm not saying that it's flat out impossible that we could move to the stars, because my wife is a chemist and a hardcore scientist, and she reminds me you should never say things are impossible. And it's not even on the order of faster than light travel, which I think is impossible and is just a literary game that we play with ourselves. It's just that it's exceedingly difficult, very, very low probability. And it could only happen if you had already established a fully sustainable civilization on Earth. That's the necessary precondition for any interstellar travel. So it's worth pointing these things out, because even terraforming Mars, which is a project I love the idea of it. I still have to point out that the new things that we've been learning about Mars
Hmm.
really complicate that whole thing. Um,
Tell us a little bit about that, Stan. In terms
sure.
of is that in terms of the evidence of flowing water, and what is complicating the vision you laid out so well in your Mars trilogy?
Well, flowing water would be great, although there is not flowing water on the surface of Mars. This is a kind of a NASA hype because they like to draw our attention to Mars.
Uh,
Water on the surface of Mars will sublime away because the atmosphere is only 7 millibars, and which atmosphere here is 1,000 millibars or so. So what they mean is that there seems to be mud, and that's exciting. We know there's lots of water on Mars. We've known that since the Viking photos came back, and we saw the river canyons, and it's been confirmed, and that's all great. But what we've also found out is that there are perchlorates in the soil that are poisonous to humans. At
hmm.
even in the parts per billion range, they're really terrible for your thyroid function. And it's even used as a medicine on Earth to cure hyperthyroidism. But it's all over on Mars, apparently, and in huge quantities. So it's soluble in water, and so that means that it is not a complete stopper to terraforming. Like if you water the entire planetary surface, at that point, the perchlorates will mix in and become something else that's less toxic. But that is a big slower downer, and so is the lack of nitrogen. We are finding that Mars has far less nitrogen in its basic inventory of volatiles than we would have thought, given our ordinary theories of planetary accretion and development. So that's a little bit of a mystery, and it may be solved or it may not. But in the meantime, terraforming needs a lot of nitrogen just to be able to have a buffer gas in the atmosphere and keep plants alive and everything else. So again, it's not a stopper, but it is a huge slower downer in terms of how long would it take to terraform Mars. And in my Mars novels, I had it happening in, say, 300 years, because there were plans out there in the 1980s that talked about doing it in 50 years. And I wanted to play the literary game of having one set of characters live through the whole experience. But in realistic terms, what if it's going to take, say, 50,000 years? Well, that's still an interesting project. It's not impossible, but it certainly is not on a timeline that we usually think of.
No, and it's on a timeline equivalent to much of human existence. So it's a good
Right.
chunk of so if you want to put it in that kind of perspective,
Yes.
you're really thinking long term there,
Yep.
which is great. But I want to get back. We're talking with the science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. Stan, I want to get back to this idea you mentioned, which I loved in the piece too, in the Scientific American piece, that in order to achieve anything, any chance at interstellar travel, and it may be true of terraforming Mars too, we'd need a civilization here to make it happen out there. Because my reaction to that when I read it was, if we develop that kind of civilization, wouldn't it also be the kind of civilization that could get this planet right?
Sure. I think that the knowledge necessary to make a tiny model of Earth's ecology and send it off to the stars somewhere and have it last long enough in good health to inhabit another planetary system somewhere else implies a level of knowledge and experience and expertise that would make us probably really good at keeping the homeostasis here on this planet. So, in a way, the project could be seen as a modeling exercise. Right now, it's just a thought exercise because nobody's going to be building a starship anytime soon. And the people for whom that's their hobby, well, that's their hobby, but it's still completely a thought exercise. It would be stupendously expensive, and we don't know anywhere near as much as we need to right now to do it. So, as a thought exercise, what you can do is say, well, what would it take? And then look at what we're doing here and say, gosh, it would be, thousands of times easier to do here since it's our own native planet. Let's do it here first and learn from that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it also brings to mind something else, Stan, which is I know a lot of people, friends of mine, a lot of them who talk a lot about, let's say, artificial intelligence as an existential risk to humanity, and we hear a lot about that in the in the news now because of Bill Gates' interest, Elon Musk's interest, and so on. But a lot of times, my reaction to this, and I wonder if you see any parallel. A lot of times, my reaction to that is while we're thinking about highly hypothetical risks from technology that may or may not come to pass in the near future, let's also think about the very real risk. In fact, the near certainty that there will be hundreds of millions of refugees if we don't do something significant about climate change. The fact that millions of people are dying unnecessarily from diseases and living conditions today. These are, on a human level, existential risks for millions of people that I get concerned. I think we should address the abstract and the long term, whether it's a vision like interstellar travel or a risk like, let's say, destructive AI. But I worry sometimes that some of us get so fascinated with the intellectual exercise that we lose track of the immediacy of the problems we're facing today.
Yes, I'm with you on that. I think it's pretty clear that because these problems are overwhelming and emotionally distressing. I think that these other things that we think about, the AI, the interstellar, are escape fantasies.
Hmm.
They're ways that you can go to a place where you can think about something that isn't so painful and uh, park the worries that you have and the fears that you have about the situation that we're in right now with the very real problems facing us. I think strong AI is a very minor problem because we can never understand how the brain works because you can't investigate a living brain at the level of detail where thought is actually happening. It would be too intrusive, and so we have to study the brain by indirect means of blood flow and electrical activity. And these are gross manifestations that are perhaps 4 or 5 magnitudes larger than the level at which thought happens. So, in other words, you can take a dead brain, you can look at it with an electron microscope right down to the atomic level and see it, but you don't know how it works. And studying a working, living brain is very indirect and inconclusive about how we think. So when people start to worry about strong AI, they're ignoring the fact that we can never really even understand our own brains. And this isn't just a temporary halt. This is a permanent barrier for our ability to understand ourselves. And so you can't, artificial intelligence might become like the most astonishing and helpful thing in the world, but we're not going to be making consciousnesses because we don't even know how our own works. So these are somewhat phantom problems.
Right.
Uh, they're the problems of prosperous, high-tech Westerners who are, by focusing on them, they are allowing the peripheral vision to blur. And in that peripheral vision is, 3 billion people who are living on $2 a day or less, and 2 billion people who don't have toilets, and the other problems that are just painful to think about.
Man, I am totally with you on that one. I got to say, we're talking to science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson, and I wanted to get back to another. You've mentioned it, but I want to just resurface another item you mentioned, issue you mentioned in your Scientific American piece, because I think it has a sort of metaphoric truth that goes beyond the simple statement of fact. Although the statement of fact is very important, which is that we are in terms of our microbiomes and so on, we are formed by our physical environment. We are formed by this ecosystem we live in. So your point is that we need to replicate the whole ecosystem if we want to do something like ultra long distance interstellar travel. But see, to me, not to get overly poetic about it, but I think that also means we are inextricably linked to the planet that formed us wherever we go, and that therefore if we don't recognize the fact, my conclusion is we can't survive off this planet and we can't survive on it until we recognize that interdependence.
Yes, again, I'm with you there. This is all very like what I've been thinking. There's a great nature writer from England, Flora Thompson, an old Quaker, who wrote, "We are bubbles of Earth, bubbles of Earth." And I think that the co-evolution of us on this planet means that we very likely will never be healthy when we're away from it, because we don't know which factors we can change without hurting our health, like living in 1G or living in this gravitational field or living with this microbiome and macrobiome, the bacterial load on Earth. So even in my solar system futures, which I've been enjoying quite a bit throughout my career, but especially in 2312, they have what they call the sabbatical, where they have to come back to Earth and live on Earth for a while in order to go back out into the solar system and enjoy whatever adventures they're having out there. And one thing I would like to add is that the analogy here for the solar system is it's not the New World compared to Europe. It's not the frontier. It's not a space where we're going to go out and have ordinary human lives like we would moving across to another continent. It's more like Antarctica than it is like the New World. So we have people in Antarctica right now. Nobody cares very much, except for the people down there, and they're having a blast. But they have to come back to what they call the world, because of conditions being so tough down there. And so scientists go down there to stations. They do incredible work. They have a lot of fun. It's very beautiful and exciting if you pay attention to it. And then they come back to the rest of the world and regain their health, eat some vegetables, and maybe they'll go back again. Well, the solar system's going to be like that for us for ever so long. It's beautiful, it's fascinating, it's scientifically interesting. It's actually useful to know as much as we can because Earth is a planet too, and we want to study it. So I love space science, and space science is an Earth science, but it's not the frontier. And the scientists and astronauts that go to Mars, for instance, they'll go up there, they'll spend 5 years, they'll be fried by radiation. It will be like smoking a pack a day for all the time that they're there, or even like 20 or 30 years worth of cigarette smoking in terms of cancer danger. Then they come home and they say, well, it was worth it. And some of them will get cancer and some of them won't. It's all statistical.
Right, but
But you,
whether you're talking about people in Antarctica or future people on Mars, they'll have a blast because they have a very atypical, and I say this with love and respect, but a very atypical set of passions and interests. And so, I think your point also is we can't even they have to come home, but we can't extrapolate that that'll mean that everybody will want to go. That it will be like we settle the West Coast, and pretty soon there's San Francisco.
no, right. No, that's right. Although pretty soon, it just depends if you're thinking on evolutionary terms. In 10,000 years, there will be a San Francisco on Mars. It'll be fantastic. But in this next 100 years, where we're thinking about what do we do as a useful project right now, there are there is this moral hazard of thinking, well, there are people who are plotting to have us living on Mars, therefore we don't need to worry about wrecking the Earth.
Right.
It's an unconscious thought. Nobody would say that explicitly,
No,
but
I agree, but I completely agree. And unfortunately, Stan, we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time. But as you put it so well in your piece, there is no planet B. So, Kim Stanley Robinson, author and writer of the recent piece on interstellar exploration, thanks so much for coming on the program.
well, thanks for having me on.